Hi, this is Melissa Varga. I'm the Science Network Community Manager at UCS, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on communicating science through storytelling. Today we'll hear from three different perspectives: a science journalist, a CEO and public health specialist, and activist and entrepreneur. Their day-to-day work varies quite a bit, but they all know the importance of telling a good story to get their point across. Today, our presenters will share with you some strategies about how to create compelling stories from your research, how this can make an impact, and an opportunity for you to share your story with the world. So if you have questions or comments throughout, please share them with us through the chat box on the side of your screen, and I will pass them along to the presenters. And speaking of presenters, joining us today we have Seth Shulman, the Editorial Director at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and a veteran science journalist whose work has appeared in Nature, The Atlantic, Discover, Technology Review, Parade, and many other publications. And you may know him from his Got Science articles that he writes for Huffington Post. Next up, we'll hear from Casey DeMoss, the CEO for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. A Louisiana native, Ms. DeMoss has worked tirelessly to protect her home, culture, and coastline from damaging wetland and energy policy. She has been in the trenches of environmental justice work for 17 years and has become a progressive energy policy leader both locally and nationally. And finally, we'll hear from Eric Michelman, the director of More Than Scientists. As a climate activist in the Seattle area for more than a decade, he is the founder of the Climate Change Education Project. He is also an experienced entrepreneur in the software industry. So to kick things off today, let's get a sense of who is joining us with a quick poll question. Do you have a go-to story that you'd like to tell about your research or your work? Just yes, no, or maybe you're not sure if you have a go-to story. Go ahead and weigh in, and we'll give everyone a couple seconds to share their thoughts with us. Okay, it looks like a little more than half of you maybe don't know what that go-to story is for your research or your work. Looks like quite a fair amount of you do, though, which is excellent. So I think our presenters today will agree with me that developing that go-to story can be a huge asset for your work. And with that, I'll hand it over to Seth, who will tell us how to create that story.
Great, thanks Melissa, and hi everybody, thanks for joining. My name is Seth Shulman. As Melissa said, I'm the editorial director here at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to work closely with an amazing group of dedicated scientists and analysts, trying to help them produce reports, prep for media interviews, and deliver talks to diverse audiences. And you know, today I want to feature the power of storytelling, and I wouldn't be doing my job very well if I didn't sort of start off with a story myself. And so I wanted to tell a story very briefly that explains some of my experience and my passion for this subject matter. And it's the story of Basin F and the most toxic square mile on Earth. And it's a story that goes back some 25 years when I was a young science journalist working on the biggest story so far in my career. And it had come to my attention that the U.S. military was the nation's largest polluter of hazardous waste. And to make matters considerably worse, they were at that time not obligated to follow any of the nation's environmental laws the way corporations and individuals were. They had a blanket exemption. And so I studied up on the facts and details of the problem and was able to convince the Atlantic to cover the story. And I had tons of facts and figures, and they were very impressive. I mean, the scale of the problem was enormous. But the editor there said to me, and something that I remember very clearly, that while they were interested, I really needed to do something that would really kind of bring home the story to people, and that just presenting a lot of figures about how much toxic waste the U.S. military was producing was not something that people would necessarily be able to latch on to. And so I scratched my head a little bit and looked in, and it soon became clear that that while they were literally tens of thousands of toxic sites from the U.S. military around the country, they were not at all equal to one another, that some were far more serious than others. And I heard through the grapevine that one of these sites on the outskirts of Denver was thought to be the most toxic square mile on Earth. And I might think differently nowadays, but at that time that seemed like a very exciting place to go for the story. And so I headed out to Denver, and my experience there was really transformative, both for the subject matter and for the story. First of all, it's a beautiful place in the Rockies, nestled inside the Rockies, and after getting clearance, I went out and drove miles onto the site, and we drove along, and on the left-hand side of this sort of big plain, you could see the outskirts. It was right near the Stapleton Airport in Denver, so very close to the city. And we drove out literally for miles, and on the left-hand side there are these big depressions in the land, the size of a small lake, each one. And we passed them, and they were labeled Basin A and Basin B and Basin C, and they were burnt out big depressions in the land. And finally we got all the way out to Basin F, and there was a beautiful day. It was literally a glowing toxic lagoon of toxic sludge, and this is a place on the Rocky Mountain Arsenal where the U.S. had made chemical munitions for years, nerve gas and other chemical weapons that were designed to kill people in minute quantities. And so the thing that really struck me, and I remember it 25 years ago, I remember it very, very clearly to this day, is when we got out, the guy told me that Basin F was the first one that had been lined with concrete, and all the materials used to make these highly lethal chemicals for the previous basins had all drained into the groundwater outside of Denver and were migrating toward the city. Basin F, came to be a really important part of that work for me. I wrote the Atlantic piece. It made a big impression on many people, including people at the MacArthur Foundation who read it and helped underwrite many more years of research on the subject. And what finally ended up happening is that this is during the first George H.W. Bush administration. On the basis of this, using sort of Basin F as sort of really the poster child for this issue, I was really able to help put it on the agenda, and ultimately, not much more than a year or two later, Congress passed something called the Federal Facilities Compliance Act that for the first time ever made the military have to obey the nation's environmental laws. And so Basin F taught me a lesson about how stories can move people and make change. And it also made me passionately interested in the power of stories and helping other people to find their Basin Fs. Stories that really encapsulate what they're trying to talk about that can move people and help make change. And that's a lot of what I do now at UCS. So that's my story. I want to just very quickly kind of click through a few things, and then I hope that we can talk about some of them in the Q&A. Very simply, I believe the best science communication conveys information clearly and tells a story. On the communicating clearly, the first piece is just to avoid jargon. For those of you that are in the sciences, this is a kind of a obvious thing to say, but I could literally walk around with a T-shirt like this. This is sort of, I feel like I'm sort of the jargon police around here. It's amazing how much we all, no matter what our field, tend to speak in jargon, to use acronyms and abbreviations to the extent possible. I mean, I just can't tell you how much this gets in the way. the example I like to use is if you use this kind of way of speaking, it might work well for your subdiscipline, but when you're talking to a broader audience, you literally might as well be building half a bridge. You're just simply going to lose a lot of your intended audience before you begin, because you're not going far enough to reach them where they live. The other piece about conveying information clearly is just organizing and framing. So, I mean, as people in the sciences, you deal with data all the time. Raw data is always messy, and a large part of science is trying to organize that. And one of the problems that I've come up against in my work here at UCS is that a lot of the rules about how you organize that might be great for a scientific article in Nature or some other place really don't apply. And so I wind up, we have Yoda here from Star Wars. I wind up telling people pretty much that they need to think about it in a different way. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that you abandon the scientific method, but that when we're really talking about how to organize the information, different rules apply, especially when you're speaking to a broader audience. And one analogy for thinking about that is that a lot of our work describes things in this way. This is something that Dan Jones, who was Obama's green energy czar, came and talked to us and used this analogy. I think it's a really good one. A lot of our work in the sciences looks a lot like this. It looks like the back of the brownie box. And really what we want to do and what storytelling can do is to draw people in a very different way. At UCS, this part is very much in our wheelhouse. We love to get into the details of the amount of fat and sugar in a product, but a lot of times giving people the front of the brownie box is really the best way to draw them in, and that's a lot of what storytelling can do. And so, just really quickly, when I talk about story, I want to be very clear that I'm using a particular definition, that really just story as a template for the easy transmission of information or ideas. Because when I talk with a lot of scientists and they hear story, it raises a lot of alarm bells. And I think, the fear really is that in some sense you're going to have to turn your work into some kind of tabloid, that you're going to have to compromise on accuracy or level of detail, or that it will somehow dumb down or oversimplify your work. And I'm here to tell you from a lot of experience that is not necessarily the case, that I'm very confident that there are a lot of ways to do this without making those kind of compromises. So in terms of this template for the transmission of ideas, I want to suggest just a couple tools that you can think about. The first one I like to think about is hooks. I used a hook in the beginning, talking about the most toxic square mile on Earth, trying to get your attention to a topic. Hooks can often just be a way of scene setting or telling a story in the beginning that grab people and get them on the wavelength that you want to be discussing. Similarly, I like to think about handles in a story. We do a lot of work with numbers and data at UCS, and so to give you just an example of handles in storytelling that can help people latch on to what you're saying, we're very proud of the fact that we helped pass new tough fuel economy and emission standards for cars and trucks. And the program folks came and were talking about the fact that they were very happy that we were going to keep some 300 million tons of carbon dioxide from being released into the atmosphere by 2030. And the problem is that most of our intended audience really has no idea what to make of that kind of a number. So we came up with a number of handles, and one that we used to good effect, I think, is that this work is going to be the equivalent of taking some 41 million cars off the road by that date. And that's something that people can latch on to a lot more. Another one is that it's going to cut our oil use by more oil than we currently import from the Middle East. So finding these ways of talking about things that people can latch onto is also really important. And finally, I mentioned before this issue of framing. Zooming into the parts, the key messages that you want to impart, and framing them into a sort of a satisfying format. And this will be the final thing I want to talk about is just this basic format of a story. At its most basic, what a story is about is that it often has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a satisfying structure somehow for imparting information. And when we're talking about scientific information, a good way to think about this is identifying a problem that's sort of the beginning, analyzing it in some fashion, and proposing some kind of solution that can often fit into this very satisfying format. A guy named Randy Olson, who wrote a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist, which I'd recommend to you if you haven't seen it, uses a very similar construct. It's in some ways even more simple. He uses and, but, and therefore, and finds that it can be very helpful, especially for people in the sciences, to start converting their work a little bit more into a story format. It goes basically like this. And something is going on that we should pay attention to, but a problem has arisen to make matters worse or to change our standard way of looking at it, and therefore we need our proposed remedy. That is, something has to change. And again, if you're thinking about presenting a certain work that you're doing or discussion of science policy, these basic formats can be tremendously helpful at making it easier for people to receive and understand what you're going for. If you think back on that messy data I talked about and you think of it as a jungle, I would suggest to you that story can provide a path for uninitiated folks to travel on through that data. It's really much like the way that it's so much easier to remember lyrics when they're set to a tune, and that's sort of what story can often do. So with that, those are a few tools to think about as you think about trying to use storytelling in your work more. And as I said, I look forward to the Q&A and hearing questions or issues that you guys have on this. So thanks a lot.
Okay, my name is Casey DeMoss. I'm with the Alliance for Affordable Energy. We are based in New Orleans, Louisiana. We advocate on behalf of utility customers, so anyone with an electric bill. We do highly technical work that is very jargony, as you can imagine, energy regulation. You start talking about that at a party and you'll be talking to yourself very quickly. Next slide. So communicating is a huge part of what we do, because without effective communication, we don't get the policies passed that we need to get passed. But I was thinking about this and about how to communicate and how many different classes and lessons I've had on communication, as well as just talking to my mom, who is a scientist. She's a physicist. And thinking about how scientists communicate one-on-one just through in their personal relationships, and versus when they're communicating about their science, that there really is quite a difference there. And so the first thing I would have you remember is that when you're communicating your science, remember that communication itself is a science. And because it's a science, it's manageable. It's something you can learn and replicate. So it's not like some people are just gifted orators, but most of us learn how to communicate by following a very simple formula. Next slide. So instead of E equals MC squared, here we have E plus I equals C. So emotion plus information is communication. This is just the simplest way to think about it, that people tend to listen to other people when they have an emotional connection to that person. This has been borne out by psychology study after psychology study, that people tend to believe information from friends and family more so than information from more distant connections. Since scientists, you already have the information, what you need to do to complete the circle is find that emotional connection with the people you're trying to communicate with. Next slide. So part of making an emotional connection is telling a personal story. People can see you as a person. So my personal story is my organization struggles with doing energy regulation in the Deep South, where a lot of funders and politically savvy folks think that doing energy work in the South, clean energy work in the South, is too hard. And so I went to see Selma back in February, and was an amazing film, very emotional, and it got me thinking that what if MLK had gone to Berkeley, California? Would we have the Equal Voting Rights Act? And it got me thinking about how to communicate about why it's important to do the work that my organization does in the South, because you do work where it's hard. Next slide. Part of telling a good story is making it inspiring and or dramatic and or a failure. Other people can relate to these dynamics in communication in other people's lives, because we've all felt inspired, we've all been in a dramatic situation, and we've all experienced failure. When you open yourself up to revealing these things about your own life, it pulls people into your story. Next slide. We also don't want to talk about milk to people who are lactose intolerant. You need to connect with your audience by finding some kind of common ground. So this picture that you're looking at is in New Orleans at nighttime, and if you can see in the dark curve, there looks like there's a little U. That's the Mississippi River. So this is why New Orleans is called the Crescent City. I'm showing this picture to community groups in New Orleans. I'm connecting with them by showing them a powerful picture about where they live at night and why it, and everyone who lives in New Orleans actually really loves and cares about the city. And so this is one frame of connecting for me in my town. Now it'll be different in other locations, of course. So best judgment. Next slide. There are opportunities to practice this kind of communication so that you don't have to do do your best performance the first time you go out to communicate. TED Talks obviously is a fantastic place to try to present this kind of communication, emotional information. It's not that hard as you might think to do a TED Talk. I was fortunate enough to do a TED Talk myself. All I did was write into the TEDx oil spill an idea for a talk, and it was accepted. So don't think that you have to be a famous scientist or a dignitary to do a TED Talk. It really is pretty accessible with a good idea. Also Toastmasters, and you can click on either one of these pictures. I'm not sure if the hyperlink, Melissa, you can correct me, but I did hyperlink my TED Talk to the TED Talk picture, and on the Toastmasters, a hyperlink to a place near you where you can sign up to practice speaking in front of other people and connecting. A few pointers on PowerPoints. This is just one of those basic things like don't use jargon, explain acronyms. I took a PowerPoint class from this man who literally called himself PowerPoint Nazi. and he had basically two things. Like one, keep it simple. If the font below 24 in PowerPoint does not exist, so now you've heard this, never ever put language in the PowerPoint that's below font 24. And that font where it actually says font below 24 does not exist, that is actually font 24. So that is the absolute smallest your letters should look in any given PowerPoint. Second, visual. If people are reading, they're not listening. Reading and listening takes two different parts of the brain. And so if they're doing one, it's likely that they're not doing the other. And so what you want to do is use powerful visuals instead of a lot of words, because you want to use this opportunity to be talking, connecting with the audience. And that is the last slide. And of course, children, everybody likes children, right? Anyway, comments welcome.
Hi. So this is Eric Michelman. I'm the director of More Than Scientists. Our aim with More Than Scientists is to create a setting for scientists to talk about their personal views about climate change. Not to report the science, but to convey that climate change is real, what it means for our children and our grandchildren, and that we need to take it seriously. In short, to talk as fellow parents and concerned citizens, making more of a personal connection with the people who need to hear their message. And our goals are this greater feeling of connection by the public with the scientists for the purpose of leading to greater acceptance of the scientific message, a better appreciation of the strong consensus that actually exists among scientists, and a better understanding of the common human effects of climate change. Now we do this through videos that the scientists make and we present on our website, YouTube, social media, and through partners. And on the slide here you can see this is our homepage. These are videos, and there's a lot more below that. We've got about 250 so far from a wide variety of scientists at leading universities like MIT, University of Washington, Harvard, and several others. And they're submitted by scientists who are seeking to contribute to the public conversation. So if you, excuse me. So if you want to make a video, and more to the point, if you want to connect with the general public, and that's our goal. I should say up front, our goal is to connect with the general public, people who aren't currently clued into climate change. They're intellectually honest, they're open-minded, but like everyone, they're busy with their lives, their families, and they hear so much conflicting stuff that they really haven't tuned in. Those are the people we're trying to address. And it's a challenge because they're not looking to make this connection. If you say they're busy, they're not looking to educate themselves on the science. They're not looking to educate themselves on climate change. But to move forward on climate change as a nation, as a society, we need to involve them. And so if we want to connect with them, what does that mean? What are they interested in? Well, like anyone, they're interested in you. They're interested in people. If you want to be effective in communicating, you need to make that personal connection. And it means letting people get to know you as a person. It's human nature to be interested in other people, how they feel, how they think, their hopes, their worries. You know, a big reason we love stories is because they encapsulate all that in an interesting and easily accessible way. Now, I mean, again, scientists make many different presentations and many communications for a wide range of purposes. For this in particular, ours, you know, hitting what we call the general public, or the movable middle, as they say. The science itself isn't so effective. People aren't looking for science lessons here. They're open to personal human connections, but being taught the science, not so much. So what kinds of things do they find interesting? If you want to participate in this conversation and hopefully affect your friends, your neighbors. What would they be interested in? What can you talk to them that will get them involved in the discussion? Well, the first one is simply, how do you feel about climate change? Why do you care about it as a person? Not afraid will be people you're close to. A number of the videos, the stories we posted have to do with family that's been affected. The drought in the West has been a big one, but obviously others, Hurricane Sandy, Katrina. And again, we're not saying that all these are specifically climate change. In fact, everyone is very careful to say we can't attribute any one weather event to climate change. But we can say these are the kinds of things we can expect more of. And while I'm on this, let me mention an important point that we're not looking for anything scientifically controversial. And this is actually a fairly conservative site scientifically. This is a digression from the slide, but it's probably appropriate here. Where the general public is today is simply questioning the reality of climate change. Honestly, so many people aren't clear, is it real, is it happening, and if it is it caused by people? And the most important message scientists can communicate is simply, yes, climate change is real, it is happening, it is caused by human activities, and something we need to be concerned about. And if that is your message, that is a great contribution, because unfortunately still in this year 2015, that's where our society is. Or as one contributor said, one of the professors from UW, I know if I don't say anything that's not in the IPCC report, I'm on solid ground. If I stick to what you can read in the IPCC, it's not controversial, it's fine, and that's pretty much where we are. So, the next point is climate change real? And why does it matter? Let's say you're at a barbecue and a neighbor honestly asks you, I've heard about it, just starting to clue in, and they're not skeptical, they're honest about it. Why is it a big deal? What would you say? Well, you wouldn't start explaining the science of it. You wouldn't go into greenhouse gas forcings and all that. You'd say, well, this is what it's giving for our kids and our grandkids and future generations. That's why we should care about it. It's the human side of it. And of course, what gives you hope and optimism? It's an important part of making connection with people is to have them feel, empowered that, this is not only a problem, but it's something we can address and we will address, and we simply need to get together and work on it. And so if someone wants to help, what should they do? What should we as a society be doing? And, in summary, it's a matter of showing that you care, talking honestly, let your passion and conviction come through. Those are, I think, important elements for any connection, any communication. And for our particular topic, climate change, it's letting people know that it's a human issue and it's going to matter to us. So along those lines, more specifically in detailed sense, as you're talking, what are style points? Well, again, it's about personal sharing about yourself. It's not giving a talk or a lecture. People aren't generally interested in that. You're just talking with a friend, human-to-human connection, not giving a lesson. And interestingly, it turns out, if you use the word you should, whatever, it puts people on the defensive. Where if you talk about me, or even better, we, it's inclusive and draws people in. Expressing personal concern, not scolding society for what's happening, expressing hope, not trying to generate feelings of guilt. doesn't help to make people feel bad. We want to make them concerned and bring them in and motivate them to action. And being genuine. We've participated in a lot of the filming of the initial videos, and it's interesting. A lot of times we'll do a take, and then the scientist will say, well, I think I could do better on that. Let me try it again. And we film it again. And technically they do better on it, but they don't come across as believable because they're more careful in their wording, and they look like it's more of a produced thing, where if you just come out and talk with, stumbles and ahs, people recognize it as genuine. If you're interested in making a video and helping us contribute to the conversation and make an impact on the public and understanding, just the basics here, climate change is real. If you go to our website, morethanscientists.org, it'll be very obvious where you can find a video submission page. A couple of big links, you can't miss them. And we also have a downloadable do-it-yourself video toolkit that describes some of the basics of mechanically how to make a good video and what are some of the questions that you might want to talk about. Although in the end, it's your video, so it'd be really whatever you wanted to talk about. And that's it. Be happy to answer any questions here or later offline. Please feel free to contact me. Love to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you also to Casey and Seth. We have time for a few questions, and we've been getting some in, so if you have some, feel free to send them through the chat box. If we don't get to them today, we will try to answer them afterwards via email. And I'm going to go back to this slide that Seth had earlier because I think it's helpful to keep in mind while we answer some of these questions that have been coming in. So the first question is from Kendra. She says, a good story usually has strong characters. How do you maintain objectivity and develop characters in your science story? Seth, do you want to take the first crack at that one?
Sure. Well, my background is as a nonfiction writer, and I imagine when we're talking about stories, we're not talking about characters in a fictional sense. So in that sense, I mean, it's okay to to be a little bit subjective in your portrayal of some of the people that you're talking about. I think the use of story in the way that we're talking about it for science communication, while there's no question that characters are potentially really important, I think it's really, as I was saying before, sort of a tool or a template for trying to get ideas across, and it's just a nice format to put them in. So I wouldn't worry too much about objectivity, I guess, is my bottom line. I think people understand that when you're telling a story and it involves some people, that it's your story and your subjective view on it. So I hope maybe that's helpful. I would say, obviously you don't, I would say don't worry overly much about trying to maintain objectivity in terms of the characters that you're bringing in. Just make sure that you're true to the key points that you're really trying to get across.
Great. Casey or Eric, did you want to weigh in on that?
No, I thought that was well put. Great.
All right. We have another question here from one of our participants. He says, I read in Jonas Sack's book that casting a story into the reluctant hero's journey is a powerful way to tell a gripping story. Can you recommend a hero's journey for climate change? Eric or Seth, do you have any recommendations for a hero's journey on climate change?
It's interesting. We've worked very closely with Jonah and his agency, Free Range, in developing the campaign, and we've talked a lot about it. To the extent the individual scientist can present his own, his personal journey in this way, it's very powerful. If you can talk about how and some do, how studying this really came to see the importance of it and the magnitude of the problem and why it's so important for us to act on it. And present it as kind of a personal evolution. That's always a powerful way to present it. And family stories about to directly answer it, I'll leave it at that.
I mean, I agree. I think Eric's work is a perfect example of the hero's journey. All those videos that scientists are making really fit into that mold. They're people that are devoting their lives and caring about trying to study this problem and do things about it. And I think I think the success of Eric's effort shows how powerful that it's a perfect example of that particular story template being a very effective way to bring across and encourage better understanding of the issue for a lot of people.
Okay, this next question reminded me of Casey and the work that she's been doing in the South. How do you explain slow, methodical progress in a world that champions immediate, significant breakthroughs? Casey, do you have anything to maybe can you speak to that based on your experience?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think you have to keep your eye on the prize. It's a long game. I myself get really frustrated because I live in a location that was destroyed by a hurricane, and scientists say that Katrina would have been a lot smaller if not for climate change. And yet we can't get our politicians to acknowledge that that we thought that Katrina would be a game-changing moment, that moment where things turned around, and it wasn't. So it is a long slog through history. When I get discouraged, my friend Ann Rolfes, who's actually in a kayak over in Seattle right now, or was yesterday, she says that the civil rights movement, that we should take our lessons from there, that slavery was a law in this country, and that if there was any group of people ever in history that had the least amount of power, that were subjugated in the worst power, imbalance of power dynamic, that they were able to dismantle slavery and now and then get voting rights and then actually become elected president of the country. That gives hope. But the point is that took 150 years or more to happen. And so each generation that contributed to that success had no idea that their contribution, where that would eventually lead. And I think that we just have to keep our hearts in the right place, keep our eyes on the prize, and that we are doing our part in the hopes that eventually the good and truth will win out. There's a quote by MLK in that and I'm not going to get it right, but the arc of history is long. I'll Google it and get that quote.
It's the arc of history is long, but it moves toward justice.
Thank you. The arc of history is long, but it moves towards justice. Thank you.
That's very close.
Great. We have a question here from Andy, an issue with storytelling that he's grappling with right now. He says, I'm committed to raising awareness of the role forests play in stabilizing our climate and the urgent need to prioritize forest restoration. How do I present this as a story?
Well, I have, unless other people want to jump in, it reminds me of a guy I profiled years ago whose name is Steve Loken, and he's a pioneer of sort of the sustainable building movement. And what brought him to mind is that he told a very powerful story that could be useful to you of going to a clear-cut forest. He was a builder, a contractor, and he had the experience. He's from Montana, and he went to a clear-cut forest, and he really describes an epiphany that he had when he was there, that he really didn't want to be part of an industry that was doing this to the forest, and so he absolutely changed his life, and that's what got him on the path of trying to find ways of doing building sustainably. You know, that kind of story, I think that, you know, that's an archetypal story too of what set you on a new path. I think finding your story of how you got to be passionately interested in forest restoration or whatever could probably be every bit as effective as Steve Loken's was for his work. So that's one recommendation.
This is Casey. Am I on mute or?
You're good.
I can't stop. I think. Sorry about that. I feel your pain. I think it is really hard to communicate our issues when you don't have a cute, furry animal or a hungry person to kind of instantly make that emotional connection. I would say, based on, you know, what I think it was Seth who was just speaking and just said, was that you connect a tree back to a person, that human beings care more about other human beings, and that the effect of that tree not being there, its effect on how it worked on other people's emotions, is more likely to create the sense that that tree is important. And the Lorax did a pretty good job of making trees seem important, although I would say that he was a terrible organizer.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. There were some questions that we did not get to, unfortunately, and we will try to send you some answers to those by email. So I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, and to let you know that we'll be following up with you after this webinar to share some of the resources that we mentioned, including the links for the More Than Scientists website and some of the links that Casey mentioned. And I'd also like to point out that we'll be posting the recording of this webinar on the Science Network workshop page if you'd like to go back and rewatch it or pass it along to colleagues. And finally, I wanted to flag a couple upcoming opportunities that you should know about. This year, the Center for Science and Democracy at UCS is putting together a forum on community science partnerships. So if you've partnered with a community group, either as a volunteer or as part of your official research, please share your story with us through this survey. The link is on the screen, and I don't think you can click it directly, but it'll be on the in the follow-up email for you to visit. And as part of the work on this forum, the webinars that we're offering in June focus on scientists as stronger community partners. So you can sign up for these on the usual webpage, ucsusa.org/SciNetWorkshops, to join us to learn about science through a community and social justice lens, and the second part of our storytelling webinar, making meaningful community connections through storytelling. And finally, if you're more interested in the policy aspect of science and interested in using your scientific expertise to inform policymakers directly, you may want to learn more about the AAAS Science and Technology Fellowships, which are opening up for the 2016 and 2017 term now. You can join a web chat with current and former AAAS Fellows on May 28th to learn more about that. And again, I'll send that link around. With that, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Seth, Casey, and Eric for speaking with us today. And I hope to see you all online in June. Thanks. Have a great day.